Great. Hello. Yeah, can you all hear me okay? Excellent.
Again, just give us a. I'll hear 33, 36, 38, 40.
Uh, okay. Well, welcome everyone to the second public information meeting on the Cascade Renewable Transmission System. My name is Christopher Clark. I'm a senior siting analyst with the Oregon Department of Energy. I'm joined up here by my colleague Todd Cornett, or not my colleague, but the department's assistant director for siting. There's also a few other department staff in the room. I just want to point out in case you have any questions or need anything during the event tonight. I'll call them out. So we have Wally Adams. You could in the back of the room. Actually, the three back in the room are Wally, Erica, and Nancy sitting at that back table. And also my colleague Kate Sloan is back there as well. So if you, like I said, if you need anything, please feel free to get a hold of any of us. Um, and we are all staff to the Energy Facility Siting Council. And I just want to point out that we do have a council member with us tonight, Council Member Byer. I don't know where you are, towards the back. And we also have Council Member Condon on the line with us. The purpose of the meeting tonight. This guy's not working again. Well, Nancy, if you could go to the next slide. Clicker's not working, but okay. Actually, did I just hit the wrong button? Oh, it's like, got it now. Okay, thank you all for bearing with the technical stuff. It's been an interesting few days on that front. Great. So just for the agenda tonight, I'm going to give a brief overview of the project. Todd is going to introduce the siting process as well. And then we have the applicant team from Cascade Renewable Transmission to give a more in-depth overview of the project and where it will be located, and the why as well. Following that, we will have a question and answer session for folks to ask any questions you have or provide comments on the notice of intent. That will, like I said, be after these presentations. So please do hold your comments until that time. As I mentioned, this is a meeting on the notice of intent, which we received on March 7th. That was submitted by Cascade Renewable Transmission System or Transmission LLC, which is a joint venture of PowerBridge LLC and Suntuo Partners LLC. Just to be very clear, they are the project proponents. They have submitted this application to the department, and we are the reviewing and permitting agency for the state of Oregon. This meeting is intended to give you all an opportunity to learn about the project and to provide comment on the notice of intent. I just want to point out that it is not a contested case hearing or a public hearing, and your participation tonight is not required to preserve issues or standing for the contested case that will occur later in the siting process. And Todd will go over that process in a little bit. Move on to what the project actually is. The Cascade Renewable Transmission System is a proposed 300 kilovolt DC transmission line with related and supporting facilities that would span about 100 miles between the Dalles and Portland. The majority of the line would be volume up. And I can also speak a little louder. Sure. Is this any better? No. Sometimes it's just the quote.
Mhm. Yeah, still nothing.
And I see that. Yeah. Everything was just fine. It's not much time.
Whoa. Yeah, we may order that pizza after all.
Anybody got a good joke?
Oh, you just speak up.
Yeah, I think, we're getting closer to crowd, not sure what else to do.
Okay.
Can we try power cycling to PA or would that help? Yeah, we're connecting.
So maybe we stand up.
Yeah, sure. So sorry about this. Bear with us, folks. I would just try to speak up a little.
That, otherwise we won't hear you on.
Oh, sure. The button was just sticking. Okay. Yeah, and can I get a quick check then from one of our staff on the WebEx that you can hear me on the webinar? Nancy, if you could just. Okay. Okay, great. So thank you all again. Thanks for your patience while we work through these technical issues. As I was saying, the project is a proposed 300 kV kilovolt direct current transmission line that would be spanning about 100 miles between the Dalles and Portland. The majority of the line is going to be buried or is proposed to be buried in the bed of the Columbia River, with additional segments buried in road rights of way or installed using horizontal drilling. The applicant has some more detailed information about the exact proposed routes during their presentation. There's 2 converter stations proposed near both points of interconnection. One of those points is the Big Eddy substation in the Dalles, which would connect to a converter station with about 500 feet of overhead AC line. And then the western converter station would be be located on a site in the Rivergate Industrial District in North Portland. That would be connected to PG's Harborton substation with about 3 miles of AC line that's undergrounded or installed under the bed of the Willamette River using HDD. I'll just make sure I'm getting everything accurately. This facility, based on its capacity, length, and location, is subject to the jurisdiction of the Energy Facility Siting Council. Todd will kind of explain what the siting process looks like in a moment, but that is part of the reason why we're here tonight. This is the very beginning of the siting process where we're getting information from you all and sharing information to help us in our development of what's called the project order, which is kind of our scoping order for what will be required in the full application for site certificate. This just shows a quick overview of the proposed route of the line. As you can see, there's a single corridor proposed for most of the length of the line, with some alternatives proposed on the western end that I can go over in a little bit more detail in just one moment. But first, I'm going to have Todd give a overview of the siting process.
Okay. Slide for me.
Yep.
Okay, so not a mic check, but a sound check. Can you guys all hear me? Great, thank you. So as Chris mentioned, my name is Todd Cornett. I manage the Energy Facility Siting Division. I'm also the secretary to the Energy Facility Siting Council. So the siting division, so we're one part of the Oregon Department of Energy. The siting division has one primary objective, and that is to review large-scale energy projects. And we review these against state requirements, local standards, essentially all applicable kind of requirements. And I'll talk about that more as I move through this presentation. So we manage the process. We work with the applicant. We work with members of the public who participate in our process. We have tribal governments, state agencies, local governments. They're all an important part of our process. So we work with them. But we are not the decision makers. The decision makers are the Energy Facility Siting Council. So they are a 7-member volunteer board that is appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. So everything that we do, in terms of putting the record together, making recommendations, getting it all sort of ready for their review, is because they're the decision makers. We are not. Not ready yet. Go back, please. So the siting process is a consolidated review. So the way it works is we have a set of standards that I'll talk about, but we also pull together all of the other state agency, local government, requirements and permits and statutes and rules into one consolidated review. And the value of that is that, with a bunch of different agencies doing different reviews, that could result in different decisions or conflicting decisions. There are also different appeal paths. So our whole process is designed to have one consolidated review. And if a project is approved, then not only are we there for the application process, but we have a fully funded compliance program. So, once a project is approved, we're there for pre-construction. We have a host of conditions related to pre-construction. We have conditions related to construction, conditions related to operation, and ultimately conditions related to retirement to ensure that facilities are taken off the landscape. So we are there for the entire life cycle of the facility, and we're funded for that as well. So we went 2 slides.
Yeah, I don't have control. You'll have to ask.
Nancy, can you go back? So we're 2 slides ahead. Yeah, that one. One forward, please. Yes. So you can see on this slide here, this basically has a list of some of the types of facilities that we have jurisdiction over. We have jurisdiction over certain types of wind, solar, transmission, pipelines, others. The project, obviously, that we're talking about here is a transmission line. So our statutory authority, or the council statutory authority in terms of jurisdiction, is in the statute that's listed on the screen, 469-311. And what that is a definition. It's a definition for an energy facility And that lists all these different types of facilities, and the jurisdictional thresholds vary. For transmission lines, it's related to three different things. It has to be at least 230 kV. This is. It has to be at least 10 miles in length. This is. And it has to be at least in 2 jurisdictions, and this is in more than that. So that's why this project is in our jurisdiction, in the council's jurisdiction, versus, say, the local government. Next slide, please. Okay, so this and the handouts have something similar to this. It's in a little bit different format, but it really talks about the same steps. There are 7 major steps in our review process. And where we're at right now is, you can see based upon the border on the very first one, is we're at the very first step. So we are at the very, very early stages. And as you receive the notice and while you're here, it's called the notice of intent. It's not an application. It's not a decision. It's a notice of intent to apply for a project. And so very, very early. And so what's required in that, and if you've had a chance to review the notice of intent, it's really desktop kind of level analysis. This is not an in-depth evaluation yet. It's really sort of desktop level work to basically tell us, the department, tell you, members of the public and the state agencies, tribal governments and local governments, what the project is generally and where it's going to be located. And that helps then us do an evaluation of that. We look for comments from you all on that. We seek comments from, again, state agencies, local governments and tribal governments. And what that does is it gives us enough information to establish the project order, which is the next step on the slide here. And what the project order is functionally a list of the specific requirements that this project has to meet. Now we have, and I'll talk about standards in another slide, but we have each project could be very different in terms of, not just the standards that are applied, but how they're applied. And so we look very carefully at the notice of intent. We seek information from all kinds of different people to figure out what really is what do they have to submit in their application? What level of review? What are the potential impacts to the varying resources that they have to evaluate? So the notice of intent is valid for 2 years. So they submitted it March 6th, around there. So once they submitted their notice of intent, it's good for 2 years. So it expires at 2 years, and if they don't get an application in, they'll have to resubmit the notice of intent. And I think, yeah, so in their notice of intent, when was it? Oh, it's October. October of 2023 is when you said you're intending to submit the application. Yeah. Yeah. So the in their notice of intent, they've indicated the intent to submit their application in October. They don't have to. They can wait all the way till, close to the end of 2 years. So I think it's important to know that, we're here now, we're seeking public comment, we're going to issue this project order. But if you don't hear from us for, another year and a half, doesn't mean the project's dead. It just means they're putting together their application, and they can still submit that application near the end of that comment or that 2-year time frame. One of the things in the slide that you can see, so underneath the chevrons, you have these green boxes. Those are all where there are opportunities for public participation. So our process includes numerous notifications, numerous opportunities for the public to participate in the process. So this is just the first of several. I won't get into the details of the next stages and how that works. We can kind of talk about that, the further this project gets along. But it is important to note this is not the only time. In fact, you'll have, if you're interested, more opportunities, numerous opportunities to participate. Next slide, please. So, yep. So this slide includes the list of standards. So there are 16 standards that are applicable to all projects. And then there are some additional standards that are specific to certain types of projects. So you can see on the bottom right-hand side, you have siting standards for transmission lines and the need standard. That's specific to this project, but if this was a wind project or a solar project, all of the other ones would be applicable as well. So the way that our process works is that the applicant has the burden of proof. It's a standards-based process. They have to submit an application which meets these standards as we describe them in detail in the project order. But it's their burden. It's not our burden. It's not your burden. It's their burden to meet, to show that they meet all of these standards. And that's based upon the evidence that's submitted in the record. So again, as we move along on this process, once they submit their application, we'll review that. We'll seek information from, everybody as to, did they get it right? Do they have enough information? Is there more information that you have that we don't have or the applicant doesn't have? Because ultimately they have to prove that they meet each one of these standards. Now, if they do, they will get an approval. But if they don't, then they'll get a denial. That's entirely on them. The burden of proof is on them. Next slide, please. So one of the elements of the notice of intent is the study area. So what this slide shows is sort of conceptually the study area. So the green center dot is, say, the project boundary. I know it doesn't look like that, but sort of imagine that that's the project boundary. So in the notice of intent, they have to evaluate at a desktop level certain resources and what are the potential impacts of this project to those resources. So for historic and cultural and archaeological resources, they have to look just within the site boundary. For land use, wildfire, and fish and wildlife, they have to look within the site boundary and then a half mile out. And so you can see the other standards, how much farther they have to go in order to evaluate the potential impacts of the project. Now, the reason I bring this up for you is because when we put together the project order, we established what are called the analysis areas. There you go. You got it. Thank you. Thank you, Wally. Yeah, much better. Okay. So analysis area. It's essentially the same as the study area, except that the amount of work that has to be put in for these analysis areas is much higher. If there is a significant natural resource area, they have to go out and do on-site studies. If there is the potential for subsurface archaeological resources, they have to go out and do subsurface probes and probably have monitors out there. So the amount of work can be quite extensive and quite expensive. And so what we want to do is through this phase, the notice of intent phase, we want to hear from everybody to say, are these correct? Based on what you know about historic and cultural and archaeological resources or protected areas or scenic resources, are these distances correct? Because then that's what we would establish as the work that they have to do to put together their application. But it could be that these shrink down because of the project, or they could expand because there's other resources out there that go just beyond these distances. So again, be thinking about that when you're reviewing the notice of intent and providing comments to us. And then for me, my last slide, next slide, please. Nope. Go back. There you go. Is land use. So, as I said, our process is a standards-based process. Every applicant has to meet the same set of standards. Land use is a little bit different in that the applicant can choose to have the local governments do the land use review. So, this project goes through a bunch of different jurisdictions. So the applicant could actually not have the land use reviewed by the department and the Energy Facility Siting Council. They could go to each one of those local governments and whatever permitting processes and reviews that they do, they would do them. They would run through their process. And then ultimately that would sort of feed back into our process near the end. At this point in their notice of intent, the applicant has indicated they want the Energy Facility Siting Council to conduct all of the land use reviews. So that's what's in the notice of intent. They can change their mind, but they have to make that decision at the application stage. So once they've submitted their application, they're locked in. But as I said, as of this point in time, they have intended or indicated their intent to have FSEC review the local land use requirements. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
Great, and we can get that next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so one of the unique features of an application for a transmission line project is that the applicant's required to provide what's called a corridor selection assessment, which basically explains what alternatives were considered and why they selected the route that they selected. As I mentioned earlier in the notice of intent, there is a single corridor proposed for most of the line, but there are multiple corridors proposed near the western interconnection here in Portland. We do just want to know that procedurally, the proposed corridors in the NOI are subject to change, and entirely different corridors could be proposed in the full application. The applicant may propose adjustments in the application, or they may propose them at these meetings. And also the applicant must consider any public comments that we receive on the NOI in selecting the corridors for full analysis in the application. I did want to show, if you could put the next slide, please. Thank you. That the the corridors proposed in the western interconnection are, the proposed route would continue in the river up until about the midpoint of Hayden Island, and then would be trenched across the island and installed underneath the North Portland Harbor area of the river using horizontal drilling. The second option, which is noted as option 2 on this map, would come on land around Broughton Beach and then would follow the right of way from Marine Drive to the proposed converter station site. There's also two options proposed to connect the converter station site to the North Lombard Street right of way. And those are basically just different routes that would cross the Columbia Slough and the Ramsey wetlands. As I mentioned, these corridors can change, but right now this is what's proposed for the western side. We were in the Dalles last night, so, and next slide, please. We did just want to show that the on land segment on the eastern side of the line would come on to land around the Dalles Marina and the riverfront park there, and then would be installed under I-84 using horizontal drilling. It then follow Tie Plant Road to around 3 Mile Creek, and then basically follow East 2nd Street, Highway 30, and Highway 197 up to the BPA complex where the Eastern Converter Station site is proposed. Next slide, please. Okay, and Todd talked a little bit about our coordination with reviewing agencies and special advisory groups. Just to be clear, those terms include state agencies with either jurisdiction or subject matter expertise in natural resources, cultural resources. Most of the permitting aspects of the facility that will be reviewed by the council ultimately. Reviewing agencies are asked to provide comments on the proposed facility within their jurisdiction and make recommendations regarding the size and location of its analysis areas, just like we've asked for the public's input on those things. The reviewing agencies are also identified to identify studies that should be conducted to identify potential impacts, identify legal requirements that may be applicable to the review of the application, and any permits that might apply to construction and operation of the proposed facility. I want to point out that the term special advisory group is another form of reviewing agencies, but those refer to the governing bodies of all the local governments in which the facility is proposed to be sited. So we've been reaching out to county board of commissioners, local city councils, all of your local elected officials to get their input, especially on the requirements for the land use review. We've also separately reached out to tribal governments that might be affected by this proposal to ask for their input as well, and offer them opportunities to meet with the department or provide input in other ways. If you could get the next slide, please. I'll go over this again towards the end of the presentation or after the Q&A session, but there is an opportunity to provide public comment on the notice of intent. We're requesting all written comments to be submitted to the department by June 1st. Any comments that we receive will be posted to our website and provided to the applicant. We've received a handful so far that you can find on there. Comments may also be provided during the Q&A session at this meeting. And again, we just want to point out that this isn't a public hearing tonight, so you're welcome to ask any questions you have about the project. You're welcome to provide comments, but again, you are not required to do so to maintain any sort of standing later in the process. And then, yeah, I think with that, I will turn it over to the applicant team to give you a presentation about the project.
Thank you. It's not working. Is that any better? A little bit better. Okay, I'll speak up to it. I'm Chris Hocker. I'm with the Cascade Renewable Transmission Project. And I want to thank the DOE staff and all of you for coming out to learn more about this project. I also want to acknowledge right up top that we're very conscious of the fact that the Columbia River Gorge area and lands on far beyond that to both the east and the west are historically the ancestral homelands of tribal nations. So we have, over the last couple of years, reached out to tribal nations to let them know about the project, to welcome their questions and to hear any concerns. There is a formal process under the federal NEPA for that kind of consultation between governments, but that doesn't prevent us from engaging and informing. And so we want to have an authentic relationship with the tribes. And I think we should all acknowledge the importance of that. As was said, this is a proposed 100-mile, give or take, transmission line that will be, with the exception of 500 feet at the eastern interconnection, will be entirely underground or underwater. About 83 miles underwater, about 17 miles in 3 segments underground. We're going to want to focus primarily on the what of the project and the where of the project. But I think for context, it's important to talk a little bit about the why. We should be at the next slide. Sorry, I'll let you know. The whole project motivation stems from the passage in both Oregon and Washington of legislation that mandates that the states achieve decarbonization and clean energy goals. And even though the Oregon legislation and the Washington legislation are somewhat different, they amount to the same thing. And a key part of both is that of the goals that were set, 80% of those goals need to be met by the year 2030. You think of 2030 as quite a ways away, but transmission projects like this are long lead time projects. We've actually been looking at this and trying to develop it for the last 3 years before we could even get to this part tonight. So with an 80% carbon neutral requirement or carbon free requirement, depending on the state, I think the challenges of meeting those goals, next slide, please, have been pretty well established. And as this slide indicates, it's been quite publicly acknowledged by utilities in the region that it will be very, very difficult to meet those goals without new transmission being developed and built. So that's really the motivator of this project. The most efficient and best renewable resources at scale, at the kind of scale that is needed, are all to the east of the Cascades. Not just Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington, but even further east in states like Montana and Wyoming for wind plants and solar plants at scale. Next slide, please. Even now, the transmission capacity across the Cascades is severely constrained. So that even now, a developer of solar or wind, regardless of where that is east of the Cascades, can't really get that kind of renewable energy across the Cascades to the west because there isn't enough transmission capacity available at many times of the year. At the same time, there's an increase in energy demand due toward the impetus of electrification, whether it's buildings or vehicles. So there's a growing drive for electrification for everything we do. And it's worth noting, I think most of us would acknowledge that a traditional overhead major transmission line has its own set of challenges that can create problems in terms of getting them permitted and built. Next slide. So here's the solution that we are proposing. And I've got a slice of a power cable. A bundle consisting of two of these can carry 1,100 megawatts. So as you can see by the right-hand photo, that is what the bundle looks like. The little cable on top is a fiber optic cable for internal communications of the system. And as Ernie will explain, how that's actually installed underwater. But here you have enough power to power 800,000 homes that can be carried, if necessary, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in a bundle like this. Next slide. Actually, you saw this map from the department, but you know, on a very high level, it goes from the Dalles in the east at the Big Eddy substation. I'm sure you're aware that there's a large BPA complex up there. Continues on into the river until you get to the Bonneville Dam. Goes around the Bonneville Dam by land on the Washington side, all buried. Goes back in the river to the western part, where we would bring it onshore on Hayden Island, about midway on Hayden. Take it over across the South Channel, over to Marine Drive, and there's a converter station site in the Rivergate industrial area, which I'll go into a little bit, but it's a currently vacant site that is owned by the Port of Portland. Next slide. This was already presented, but just to repeat a little bit, you can see where the proposed converter station, and we'll talk about converter stations in a bit, would be located right adjacent to the Big Eddy substation, taken down highways, buried into the Dalles. The only thing I would perhaps clarify from what was said is that south of I-84, it would be horizontally directionally drilled, not only under I-84, but also under the marina or avoiding the marina. So it would be one long drill into the water without any trenching. On the right-hand photo, Chris presented the two alternatives that we had in our NOI. I can tell you with about 98.2% certainty that alternative 2, which would come out at Broughton Beach, will not be presented in the application. There are issues associated with that route. We needed it at the time for an alternative so that we could have a fallback as we were exploring the Hayden Island alternative 1. That's been pretty much cleared up. There will be a slight change, modification to the route on Hayden Island to avoid, there's a dredge spoil area there. And we were told by the Port of Portland that we don't want to try to trench across that. So we're going to avoid that. It's a minor jog in the route. And there may be some other modifications for Hayden Island, but it is not going to affect the overall concept of the project. Next slide. The Bonneville Dam bypass is shown here. It's about 7 miles. We have done primarily desktop studies, but also supplemented with actual surveys in the river on areas that we've already identified as being difficult to install a cable in. One of those areas is the area just east of the Bonneville Dam. And so in order to avoid that set of problems in terms of installing the cable, we are proposing to bring it out of the river in Stevenson to bypass that causeway that's part of State Route 14. And that's at the suggestion or the urging of the Washington State DOT. But after that, to continue using State Route 14 for a few miles until you get to the federal property on the other side of the dam and bring it into the water, as you can see, just west of the, well, more than just west of the dam, to avoid any sort of interference with the facilities and the infrastructure that's already at the dam underneath that area. Next. You have heard me refer to converter stations. What's the purpose of a converter station? It's to, in our case, convert AC power from the grid to, I should say, alternating current power from the grid to direct current power. Why? Because it's much more efficient. It has a number of other advantages that we can go into at Q&A. It's the most efficient way, particularly underwater, to transmit large amounts of energy for long distances. So that's why we converted initially in the eastern point to DC power, and we take it DC all the way through the route to the other converter station in the west, which is the one in the Rivergate area that you saw on the map. It's then converted back to AC power. About 3 miles of AC line would then be taken to the shore of the Willamette, the eastern shore of the Willamette. We would horizontally directionally drill under the Willamette. Why do that? Because the sediment in the Willamette is contaminated, it's a Superfund site. So we can avoid that issue by drilling under the water, as other facilities have done, and come up on the Harborton substation. The converter station sites are about 5 acres, give or take. The one shown here, oh, I'm sorry, what do we have? I got too involved in my discussion. What have we missed? There we go, converter station. Thank you. This is a converter station that was built about 12 years ago in San Francisco, the city. There is a comparable project that goes from the East Bay under the San Francisco Bay into San Francisco, the city. And this is the converter station that was built there. It's similar to a typical substation. The large structure is the control building where the conversion actually takes place. The technology for the conversion is housed in that building. So this is about what the converter station will look like in the industrial area of Portland. The site that we have identified in conjunction with the Port of Portland as I think I said before, is an existing vacant site that's been vacant for quite a long time. It's a smaller site than typically they're able to develop in that area. It is kind of out of the way in terms of visibility. And so we feel it will make a very good site. It won't increase traffic in operation because the manning of these stations is very small. And so we feel it could be an ideal site for this purpose. Next slide. And at this point, for the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague. Ernie Griggs has been our project manager for the two undersea HVDC transmission lines that we permitted, built, and continue to operate between New York and New Jersey. He knows more about this kind of thing than I will ever know. And I thought for the purposes of explaining how the cable is installed in the river, he could give a complete description. Ernie? Oh, you're probably right.
Hey, can everyone hear me? Great. Thank you all for coming this evening. This project is important to folks in the area. It's important to us as well, for all the same reasons, actually. So I'm going to actually mention that there's a video located outside. If somebody is really curious about taking a look at that before they leave for the evening, I'm sure we can set that up and give you a chance to see it. The hydroplow, the jet plow, those are common terms for it. They allow us to do a simultaneous cable lay burial. We have the ability to get the cable buried 10 to 15 feet into the riverbed. The way that works is we will have cable spooled on either a cable lay ship or a barge, probably more likely a barge for most of this operation. For our Neptune project, we would have 26 miles of high voltage cable, 26 miles of neutral voltage cable, and 26 miles of fiber optic, and it would be bundled together. And we would bring it back off the back of the boat, and then it goes down in catenary, down into the funnel end of the what we call the stinger. The stinger is a rectangular box that has the ability to rotate. That gives us the ability to control depth. On the front corners of that stinger, there are multiple high pressure water jets. We have the ability to control the ability to control the rate at which the sediments are emulsified. And in so doing, that allows us to go along at a predicted rate of speed. Typically, we can do about, what, 1.5 miles in a day? Is that what we're typically thinking? So it's a slow process. It's a carefully monitored process. We've got data coming off from the hydroplow, which is down on the riverbed. And as that sled, it is often called a sled, as that sled is moving forward, it's emulsifying the sediments. The cable comes out the bottom of the stinger and goes right into the bottom of the trench. And as we go past, the sediments come out of emulsion and go right back into the trench. And so it's a simultaneous lay burial operation that is done almost as soon as we're there. And as a practical matter, we work with the agencies to make sure that we understand turbidity. We make sure we understand the sediments. We'll be going out to get sediment samples before long. And as we understand what the content of the sediments in the river are, we will in turn work with the agencies as to how we manage turbidity, how we monitor turbidity, and we can adjust, whether it's the water pressure, whether it's the rate of movement of the jet plow through the riverbed. We can do that as a means of controlling a major parameter that people are concerned about. There's also this video that can play out in the hall out there, or out in the room out there. We also have that. It's available on YouTube. And we're talking now about reaching out to the OEM, our cable supplier, and seeing if we can get that as an opportunity to put it up on our website and give people access to it so that they can see it and learn more about it. This is, of all the things we've talked about, this has been one of the most significantly discussed items that we have. The photo on the right is really what you see for a cable installation. On the surface of the water, there'll be a barge, a tug. There'll be probably a couple of support boats that go with that. That they call that typically a marine spread, and that marine spread is going to start. They have to land the cable at the initial end that they begin at. That cable will be basically floated on the top of the river at that point. They will put a coupling on the end of the cable. They will bring it down to the conduit that's behind a cofferdam, and with working with divers, we will connect a steel pole cable to that cable, and we'll draw it up through the conduit, and we'll bring it up to our transition joint on land. So that's how that process works. And then once we have that in place, we'll do it with each cable. Once we've got those in place, we will then start with our lay burial process and start moving upriver accordingly. I don't want to say it's a simple process, but whoever thought of it was pretty darn clever. I'll give them that for sure. So that's pretty much what I have. You might want to mention the work windows. I didn't talk about that.
We will get there. Yes.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Ernie. Next slide, please. This is a preliminary schedule. We're well aware that the process for approving a project like this is going to be a lengthy one. So this is a schedule that we believe we can meet based on our experience, but with the full understanding that there's a lot of process to go through before we can start actually construction. However, both the project in San Francisco and the projects that we constructed between New York and New Jersey took less time than this. So with proper review and taking into consideration public comment, agency comment, everything that goes into that, we feel we can meet this schedule and have the cable online by the end of 2028 or at worst midpoint of 2029. The key point of that date, of course, is the deadline of 2030, by which the states should meet 80% of their decarbonization goals. So that is very much part of a driver of this schedule. Next slide, please. Just to sort of recap some of the key features, the whole point is to help the states achieve their clean energy goals. We don't believe that this is the only solution in terms of transmission or any other kind of technology to meet those clean energy goals. But given that the utilities are projecting thousands of megawatt of extra additional capacity needed by 2030, that ours at 1,100 megawatts will make a sizable dent in getting toward those goals. As Ernie explained, we consider this, and we have proven this to be a low impact technology. When we say designed, we're at the preliminary stages, so this is nowhere near the final design. But the point is that by taking into consideration all the environmental and cultural resource aspects of the environment that we'll be in, the cable route can be adjusted to avoid or minimize impacts to those resources. And that very much includes in the river and the impacts to the life there. In terms of visual impact, there is none. In terms of resiliency for the grid and avoiding the inherent risks of other forms of transmission to severe weather or wildfire or that kind of thing, that we consider to be an advantage of this operation. We will be providing 3 years worth of significant construction jobs. And we have already signed a letter of understanding with the Building Trades Councils in the area that covers both the western end and the eastern end of the route, that union labor will be employed, and further that we will be assisting in their efforts to provide apprenticeships and training, not only for this project, but also for future renewable energy projects that will be made feasible because of new transmission. The cost, frequently get that. The estimated cost in today's dollars is around 1.5 billion. We say no public investment here. What we mean by that is that we're not looking for state tax breaks or state taxpayer dollars to go toward this. The development, we're an independent transmission developer, which means that we have attracted the private capital to move this project forward, and that the risk involved in development and construction is borne by us as the developer, not by the ratepayers or the taxpayers. When the project works and works right, and the switch goes on and it's complete, that's the only point where we're relying on taxpayer or ratepayer funds. I should rephrase that. We are not relying on that. Clearly, any major infrastructure transmission, the cost of that will be borne by the ratepayers eventually, just like any other transmission. But we're not asking for that. We are, just as a point of information, in conjunction with the Community Renewable Energy Association out in the Dalles, seeking a federal Department of Energy grant that would help alleviate the cost burden eventually. That application is going in shortly, but that will be a long process to get a review and hopefully approval of that by the federal government. And so we're not depending on that to go forward with the project. If we get it, it will clearly be a financial benefit for this region. We would expect that there will be tax benefits to the local jurisdictions. And so that's another potential benefit of the project. Next slide. As the staff has pointed out, this project is going to be subject to very close and very lengthy reviews by the public and by the agencies. We're familiar with that process from our other two projects. As we said before, the project will respect and be responsive to tribal nation concerns. Third point there, I bring up only because it's frequently asked, will there be an electromagnetic field issue in the river? And Ernie can explain that in Q&A if it comes up, but the answer is that the impact is minimal to non-existent. But more importantly, there's probably 50 studies of EMF and its potential impact on marine life. We're more than happy, and I think we have a poster that actually gives you an opportunity to see an article that kind of reviews these studies and to go to the studies themselves if you're interested. Our own experience is that not only no EMF impacts, but no negative environmental impacts post-construction and in operation. A very important way to minimize impacts is to observe what's called work windows, so that the installation of the cable would take place. We think this hasn't been imposed by the agency, but typically the work can only take place during cold weather months when there's no interference with spawning or migration. So we fully expect to have those work windows and to observe them very carefully. Next slide. The major permits, we're working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who we expect to be the lead agency in terms of the National Environmental Protection Act, the NEPA process. That NEPA process includes the mandated consultation between the U.S. government and the tribal governments, excuse me. We will need siting approvals from both Oregon FSEC, and there's a Washington FSEC that slightly different acronym there, but it is essentially similar. So we will need approvals from both states. To the extent that municipalities, counties have jurisdiction, the point of asking FSEC to coordinate those reviews is simply to have a coordinated review. It does not take away the input that the municipalities will have. We will need interconnection agreements with both the BPA and with Portland General, because those are the facilities, the substations where we will be interconnecting. This, as Todd pointed out, is the beginning of our permit application process, although there have been a number of studies at a desktop level primarily to indicate, as well as visual surveys and to some extent in river surveys, to try to establish a route that we believe is both permittable and constructible. And we'll point out that we have this kind of permitting regime already in multi-state jurisdictions and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for our existing projects on the East Coast. Next slide. This is just a list of similar projects that have been built in various places around the world. You'll see that even though 100 miles is a lengthy distance, it's not even close to the longest of these kinds of projects that have been installed in various places. You'll note that, and these are recent installations of high voltage DC. And two of those, the ones that are starred and bolded, because we're actually quite proud of them, are Hudson and Neptune between New Jersey and New York. Next slide. To talk about those just a bit. Neptune was completed in 2007, so it's been running for just, I think, about a month shy of 16 years, linking the power grid of New Jersey with the power grid in Long Island. That project provides about 25% of all the electricity used on Long Island. It runs 24/7. The Hudson project was completed in 2013. That also links the grids between New Jersey, and in this case, it goes right into central Manhattan. That's about 7 miles underwater and underground. Again, it's been running now for pretty close to 10 years. And as I said before, without any environmental impact. Next slide. Some of these folks you may already have seen, but we do have members of the team here to answer questions and to talk to you one-on-one. The guy with the hat is sitting next to me, if you didn't recognize him. And then next slide. Having done this before, we're convinced that the only way to get a project like this built successfully, and I should mention that both of the Neptune and the Hudson projects were built on time and on budget. And one of the primary reasons we achieved that is by taking concerns and issues seriously, not trying to cut corners, to engage with the public, engage with the agencies, and in this case, the tribal nations on a respectful basis, to be responsive to questions and inquiry and answer them as quickly as we can. And finally, to be partners. We alluded to the letter of understanding with the unions that's already in place, and our commitment to working with them to help apprenticeship and training and community benefits programs that can, be a long-lasting part of this area and the area of the Dalles and in between, to help continue the effort to bring clean energy to this area and make us a good neighbor in the region. So thank you.
All right, thank you. So at this point, I'm going to ask folks who want to ask a question or provide a comment to start making your way up towards the microphone in the front. Feel free to queue up a few at a time. If there gets to be a big line, feel free to stay seated. We're not going anywhere until everybody that wants to provide a comment has had the opportunity to do so. I do want to remind everyone that we are recording this webinar tonight, and we will be posting the recording to our website after we're done. So if you want to go back and listen to anything that we've said tonight, or if you want to hear last night's presentation or the comments that were given there, you'll be able to find that on our website by Friday. Great. And then as we're kind of getting ready, I did just want to point out that the department's website has a lot of helpful resources to help you learn more about the siting process. There's also more information about this project posted on the project page. As you can see on the slide here, there is a public guide to siting energy facilities to help understand the different phases and the different opportunities for public participation. There's some more general overview sheets. A lot of those are available on the tables outside as well, if you'd like to pick some up. And we do have a helpful handout with just kind of all the links listed if you can't memorize the link that's on here. I know I would have a hard time even reading it. And then one other thing I want to point out, that if you do want to provide written comments, we have a new comment portal. You can access that from our website. It's pretty easy. You just go on, fill out a web form, and that will automatically post your comment directly to our website, so everybody can see it. Great. Anything I missed there?
I would just say that we do have a computer out in the hallway if anybody would like to sign up to receive email notifications. So, some of you got paper notices, but if anybody wants to sign up to receive email notices, the links are in the handouts that Chris talked about, but we can actually just sign you up right now out in the hallway. And then after we're done with the Q&A here, we'll be here as long as anybody wants to have individual conversations or questions with my staff or with the applicant. So we're happy to take any Q&A that you have right now.
Great. And if you could go 2 slides ahead, Nancy.
Where is Washington fit in all of it? They're not going to carry it. You gotta go to.
Richard Kipp. Where does Washington fit in this? I haven't seen anything that it looks like it's only an Oregon project.
Great. Well, I can speak to that a little bit. So the project does fall in both Oregon and Washington jurisdiction. And I did want to point out some of our colleagues from the Washington court correspondent to FSEC, the Washington FSEC, are on the webinar tonight. They have a separate review process that they'll be going
I
through.
guess my question is, are they gonna share in the electricity that's coming only to Oregon, or is it?
No.
No, what?
I can answer that, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. All right. No, one of the reasons for citing the Western Converter Station where it is that there's a bottleneck in Portland. So we are taking the line past that bottleneck to that location because the power can then flow north-south once it gets to that point. So electrically, it flows both east-west, should do it this way, and north-south. So by estimate, 70% of the benefit will, and this is a rough estimate, but about 70% will benefit Oregon and about 30% Washington.
So if there's any damage done to this cable at any time, and I'm sure you're gonna tell me this never happened, but if it ever did, how are you gonna solve the problem?
We're not going to tell you it never happens because it does happen. And I may turn this one over to Ernie, but it's very rare. And the usual cause of a problem is an anchor strike. And to avoid or minimize the possibility of an anchor strike, that's one of the reasons why the burial depth is prescribed by the Army Corps at 10 to 15 feet below the sediment. So I can't tell you that it could never happen. It has happened, not to us, but it can happen. And you know, the permit requirements are designed to minimize that possibility.
So the capacity is at this particular time is set for this. What's your growth pattern for the future if in fact you needed additional power?
We wouldn't be the 1100 megawatts is the carrying capacity of the cable. So,
How long is that going to last for the community?
oh, the useful life of a project like this is rated at 40 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sam Churchill. I live on the island here. I sometimes wonder if the high voltage lines that come over the Columbia from Vancouver, that I think that 230 kilovolts, or BPA has one and PGE has another. If they fall down in a big earthquake, would this supply redundancy? Can we're fed by one substation. That's my understanding. I might be mistaken, over by the railroad tracks there. And so that substation gets fed by the overhead. I think it's from the PGE line. It just drops down. So if we do lose those overhead, one or two of those overhead, I think we'd lose power. Would this add some redundancy?
This will add redundancy for flows coming over the Cascades. In other words, coming from the Dalles into the Portland area. That's where the redundancy comes in. More transmission, multiple transmission lines. That's the general direction that this area is headed in. With regards to your specific concern for Hayden Island, they've built redundancy in with those two lines that feed the substation. In fact, we were just out there walking that yesterday to take a look at that to understand how that works. And what they do is each of those pole lines that goes back towards the large towers, basically one of them comes in and feeds to one 115 kV transmission line. The other one comes in and feeds into the other one, and that's how they build redundancy into it. And they can, PGE, BPA, those folks can give you better information as to the reliability. Those towers are pretty damn rugged. Can I say that an earthquake won't ever do anything to them? No. But frequency and so on and so forth, that's hard to tell. One thing I have learned I've been doing this for a long time. It's amazing how creative and how responsive uh, these companies can be when they have a severe storm or they have a severe event. They get pretty damn creative as to how to restore service. Also, there are special transmission towers for emergency use that are basically located in various locations around the country for that very purpose as well, to put key transmission lines back in service. So
Hmm.
that's a long answer to your question. This cable doesn't directly provide redundancy to Hayden Island, not directly. It provides it to the system. An important part of one of these cables is its system interface on each end. It works with the AC system. That's part of the design of how the control system that controls power transformers, power transfers, and also voltage support through megavar support on each end as well. So studies are done as part of the design process for the converters that allow them to work with the AC systems that they connect to. And then this interconnector will provide redundancy in the major transfers east to west.
Okay, I got another question about the fiber. Oregon has like a dozen major trans-Pacific fiber lines coming in, and $12 billion worth of data centers like Umatilla, and then there's Google, which is in Dallas. If I'm wondering if one of those, either like say Google or Amazon, could they buy the capacity and not make it available to? Do you have like a policy on that, or how would that work? The fiber.
That's a good question, and I don't have a clear answer on that. It's an interesting idea. They haven't approached us, and I can't say that we've approached them either at this point.
If I could add to that. The purpose of the fiber optic cable as part of our system is strictly for internal communication and control purposes. That said, it would be capable of having stretches where say a local community, and we've actually talked to some of the local communities, including one in this region, to see if additional fibers could be added, because the conduit for the cable the fiber optic is already there. So would it be possible to add fiber capacity to serve particular purposes? Yes, and we would be willing to do that as kind of a benefit, because the fiber optic cable is going to be there one way or the other for our purposes. We do not and don't intend to make it a separate sort of commercial enterprise. So, and the level to which we've been approached on this has been strictly kind of community oriented, where there was interest in strengthening their own communication system, and was there a way to do that? And we're happy to discuss that again, but not as a commercial venture for us, but as part of a community benefit arrangement.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else in the room who'd like to provide a comment or ask questions? If not, I think we will open it up to folks that are on the webinar. And I just want to point out, if you are, sorry.
Out of the total project costs with the two cables that you're putting in, how much is the cost of material and how much are labor and other infrastructure costs? So if you were to add a third cable, how much would that cost?
Interesting question.
Hi, James. I'm Richard Freimark. I'm Fiat Lux Modus. We're an Opportunity Zone Fund.
What I'm going to do is see if I can elicit some help from one of our other members that's here today. Jeff, could you see if you can sort of field a ballpark answer on that?
Go to this microphone here. Jeff Wood. I'm with PowerBridge, part of the development team. We don't have a detailed breakdown on all of those costs at this point in time. And adding a single additional cable wouldn't necessarily help us. If we wanted to expand the overall size of the facility, we'd need to expand our converter stations to match, and then we probably would put two more cables into the river. We've sized our facility to match the capacity that's available in the AC system that allows us to draw 1,100 megawatts out of the DAOs today. If we go higher than that, the entire AC system beyond that needs to be expanded as well. So we've done our studies electrically to see what was the optimal sizing for pulling energy out of the DAOs. It would be substantially a much greater, broader project if we tried to increase capacity over and above that, given where the AC system stands today. Hopefully that addresses your question, what you're looking for.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, and if anyone else in the room has a comment, please make your way up. Otherwise, if you're on the webinar right now, I just want to point out that you can raise your hand to provide comment. There's a participants button at the bottom of your window. If you press that, a small hand icon should come up in the lower right-hand portion of your webinar window. And if you're on the phone, you can also provide comments. You just have to press *3 on your keypad to raise your hand. And then when you're done commenting, please just press *3 again. So again, one last call for anybody in the room that wants to provide a comment. Yeah, please.
My name is Gary Kuntz. I'm curious, can this project operate with either the DC negative or DC positive pole out of service where you might have a ground return? And does that cause magnetic field problems?
This project will only operate with two cables in service. The neutral is taken care of at each converter. There is no common return for the plus and minus cables, and there is no ground return for that either. That's dealt with in the converter design.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Try not to cause a static. No guarantees. Rudy Salacori, could you clarify where the Dalles Big Eddy to where it goes into the river and how that interacts with the scenic area? I mean, you had mentioned it was going to be a horizontal drill, but is that going to be throughout the entirety of the scenic area where it overlaps?
Nancy, can we go back to the slide which shows
that'd be
the
great.
dowels? The one that's more of the zoomed in one? Yeah, from our slide deck, I think is the more focused one.
And then while they're doing that, I had a question about the in-water work window because Ulicon are broadcast spawners, Pacific Smelt, and that in-water work window, the in-water work window in the Lower Columbia is a nightmare for anyone trying to work, as you guys might be aware. But that Ulicon window really shrinks down your opportunity to work in the lower river. So I would look into that.
Well, and we're aware of that. I mean, we've seen how each state has in the past imposed its own work windows, and they do not necessarily align.
Mm-hmm.
We're aware of that, and so we are expecting tight windows, whatever that might mean. But we know that the fisheries agencies are certainly going to be very much aware of what we can't do in order to protect those kinds of consideration. And I know that they vary species by species. So we're aware of that. Again, a mile and a half a day doesn't sound like very much, but if you did that, for the 83 miles, you could get there in, I'm doing math in my head, but you could get there in, 60 to 70 days of actual work. And that could be done in a couple of campaigns. So the windows don't, from our purposes, the windows do not have to be huge. We feel that we can comply with the windows any windows that are reasonably imposed. If it's between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., we could have a problem. But yeah, we're familiar with that, and we complied with those in our other projects.
Excellent.
It's important to understand that as we manage our process from permitting into construction, the permit requirements will be baked into the contracts that we have with our OEM suppliers. And our cable supplier fully understands that there are these requirements that are placed upon them. We've been through it with them. Transbay went through it with them. Other projects have exactly the same issues. And so as they propose to construct the project, what they will do is factor that information into how they execute the work. That becomes part of the project schedule. So it's not like you have a set of requirements. Okay, now you have to build it to these requirements. They're part of the conversations as we speak already. They have an understanding of where we're going with this project, what it's all about, and how they would have to go about it.
And probably a good excuse to name the contractors that we have used in the past for both our projects. For the converter technology, Siemens, and for the cable manufacture and installation, it's a company called Prismian. They're both global, publicly held companies that have extensive experience in this kind of technology all over the world.
We appear to have our map.
Getting back to that,
So let me jump in because you brought up one question in the scenic area regulations. And so in terms of, that's essentially what the notice of intent process is to figure out what are all the different kind of requirements, including land use, and scenic area regulations are part of the land use requirements. So, should the project be proposed in any area that's governed by the scenic area, yeah, that will have to be, those regulations will have to be adhered to, just like any local land use regulations, whether they're county or city. This project's a little bit different in that, most of it is in the water. And so we don't know whether, Hood River County has land use regulations out into the water, or the city of Mosier, or Cascade Lock. So that's what this process is about. And it's the same goes to the scenic area regulation. So, is this area entirely within the urban area of the Dalles? And if it is, then the scenic area regulations wouldn't apply. But if it is, then they would. And then similarly on the Washington side, where it pops out above Bonneville Dam, if that triggers the scenic area regulations, that wouldn't be us because that would be on the Washington side, but it would still be required.
That's fair. The map, I couldn't recognize or compare that to the scenic area map that I have in my head. So I didn't,
Right.
you had mentioned that it was going to be above ground.
No,
No?
the
No.
only portion
Little.
that's above ground would be a 500-foot connector between our converter station next to the Big Eddy and Big Eddy itself.
Okay.
So that's the only, other than the converter stations themselves, that's the only visible element of the project.
this gives us an opportunity to talk about horizontal directional drilling and how it applies to our project. We have certain locations where we have to transition from underground to underwater. Although in the river bottom, it's still underground underneath the water. But anyway, the short story to that is simply there's a technology called horizontal directional drilling. And what we will do is for that particular one in the Dalles, we will start back on the municipal side of the railroad tracks. From there, we will go underneath fairly deeply. We will go underneath I-84, we'll go underneath the railroad tracks, we will go underneath the marina, and we will come out further out in the river. We'll have built a box-like cofferdam around that, And what we do at that point is we create the transition and then we bury it and it's done. It's over. It's not visible. It's not there where it's going to get in trouble from anchors or anything like that. It's a technology that is quite beneficial. It's the same technology that's going to allow us to get from one side of the Willamette underneath all the problems that are in the sediments there and up into the Harborton substation. So
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much.
thank you. Yes, sir.
Sam Churchill of Hayden Island again. That brought up a question I was wondering if apparently you talked to Port of Portland. Is this Port of Portland property that you're dealing with? So is that kind of a done deal or?
I wouldn't call it a done deal, but we've had extensive conversations and we're moving toward a letter of intent with the Port of Portland. So yes, is the answer. And the conversation site is owned by the port. Most of that part of Hayden Island, which you probably know is behind a fence, is controlled by the Port of Portland. And much of the Rivergate industrial area through which the AC cables will pass. Some of it is owned by the port, some of it is owned by the interests that have bought land, but most of that is leased. So yeah, we absolutely need the cooperation of the Port of Portland. And at this point, they've been very, I don't want to mischaracterize it. They've been highly cooperative because they see this as an opportunity, not just, for their business interests, but also the whole clean energy aspect of it and the community benefits aspect of it is important to the port as well.
Okay, thank you.
Ariana's been patiently waiting online, so I want to give her the chance to comment, and then we'll take yours if that's
I
okay.
got one other question. Richard Kip, you indicate on your brochure that there's between 300 to 400 union jobs.
Mhm.
How does that fit into this project when a barge isn't going to take that much? So where does that all fit in?
That's almost all of that is involved in the construction of the converter stations. So, and remember, there will be 2 converter stations constructed simultaneously over a 2-3 year period. So the jobs we're referring to are construction jobs during that construction period.
So how long of a period would that be in terms of the construction jobs? Is that months, years? That they'd be involved in?
Yes, we're expecting, and on a project like this, it peaks.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so, but yeah, the construction period is envisioned as a 3-year period.
3 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Want to make one comment in response to that as well, because there are some comments that were made last night in the Dows related to kind of labor and union was present there and they're present here, and we appreciate their presence. But we don't have within our process any jurisdiction or any authority over unions or labor or requirements. So while we certainly encourage the applicant to avail themselves of union labor, that's not anything that we can make a requirement or condition of approval. It is strictly outside of our jurisdiction based on statutory provisions. So I just want to make sure that's clear when everybody, as I went back early in the process, talked about our standards and that we are limited to our standards and that labor and union requirements are not related to our standards.
Right, Ariana, you should be unmuted now. Thank you for your patience.
No worries, thanks. My name is Ariana Scipioni, and I'm the regional habitat biologist for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I had a couple of questions. Do you know what the wattage of the Neptune and the other New York project? What are the individual wattages of those 2 projects? And also, do you know the wattage of the San Francisco project?
Okay, our Neptune project is 660 megawatts. Our Hudson project follows the same technical regimen, if you will. It's also 660 megawatts. The Transbay cable is 400 megawatts.
400. Okay. Were there any endangered salmonids present in the Neptune project?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
Were there any endangered salmonids present in the river system for the Neptune or New York project?
Salmonids, they weren't a significant aspect of the endangered species for the Hudson project that was of most concern was sturgeon, Atlantic sturgeon. And for the Neptune project, significant concern, but this was a commercial concern as well as environmental, was shellfish beds in the Raritan Bay. So, and there were other considerations, but from memory, those were the species of greatest concern for one reason or another.
Okay.
I
And
should mention though that salmonids in the San Francisco Bay, this was not our project, but the one I referred to earlier, was a species of concern in the San Francisco Bay, and the impact on that, I believe, was reviewed very significantly on that project. I can't speak from firsthand experience on that one though.
And then you mentioned that the lifespan of the cable was around 40 years. Is that correct? And then what would be done at the end of the cable life?
To the first point, the 40-year lifespan is likely to be less than what it will really be, because the cable itself, once it's installed, stays in one place. But let's say it's 40 years. So the question is, what do you do with that? The answer varies, because one option would be to simply take the cable out from under the sediment, pull it up. We know that could be done, but it can also be determined by the agencies that the most environmentally benign solution is to leave it in place. So there's not a cut and dried answer to that. It depends on the conditions.
Okay, there wouldn't be the possibility of another cable being installed in its place.
Well, I suppose it's a theoretical possibility. You mean at the end of its current life cycle? I would expect, but that would be, I think, someone else's decision in 40 years.
The conditions of the electric systems at that time would weigh heavily into all of the options that would be considered as a cable is approaching its end of life, so to speak. There are cables out there that have been in service for 60 years, and that's been documented. The systems that are looked at in the 20 to 40 year time frame are typically the electronic control systems. We all know about electronic obsolescence and how that plays into our world for a whole lot of things we do. The same thing is true with converter stations and the control systems that play a part in managing the transfer. The cables themselves, I don't want to say they're benign, but they're fairly passive devices. Once they go in, they're in service for a good long time.
So I'm going to respond as well. I'm going to go back to our standards. I had the list of standards on the slide. One of the standards, I mean, I didn't talk about any of the standards really in detail, but one of the standards of the council is financial assurance and decommissioning. And so with every single project that we have, we evaluate, and as part of the applicant's responsibility is to submit to us what the entire cost of removing the facility and returning the location to a useful non-hazardous situation. So that's part of their burden. They would have to submit to us whether the ultimate decision would be to leave it in place, they would have to submit to us what the cost is and all of the elements of removing that cable. And then prior to beginning construction, we would require a bond or letter of credit to be submitted to the Oregon Department of Energy, which we would hold through the end of the life cycle of the facility. So one of the requirements is that, once the facility is concluded, they would basically submit a decommissioning plan and they would propose whether to remove it or to leave it in place. The council would evaluate that and ultimately it would either be removed or left in place. But until that is done and until that is finalized, we would hold that bond or letter of credit and annually we would adjust it for inflation. Right now, with all of our facilities, we have $220 million worth of bonds and letters of credit of wind, solar, transmission, other facilities. So I don't know what the cost of this would be, but they would be obligated to submit that and we would hold that in through the entirety of the project. That way, if they went away, they sort of vanished and didn't have the ability to, remove that facility, we could do it instead of them. So I just want to make sure that that's an important part of our process. And again, I said, we are here from the very beginning to the very end of each project. And that's a big deal for the state of Oregon. And that's why that's one of our very important standards.
Thanks for that clarification. I just have one more question. What is the EMF reading of the cables at the surface of the riverbed, or at the level of the riverbed, not the surface, I should say? And then what is the EMF reading at the surface of the water? An estimate, not of course, I know the river depth changes.
I can answer the second one. At the surface of the water, it would be 0, over ambient. Go ahead.
With the cable, these cables are shielded, heavily shielded. So if you look at the cross section of the cable, you've got the center core conductor, you've got the insulation around that, you have the sheath and the armor, which are heavily grounded at each end of the cable. So when it comes out of the water, it goes into a transition joint, and those parts of the cable are grounded significantly there. So the EMF that can escape the cable, so to speak, is negligible. Do I have a good number for that? No, I don't. But I can tell you from experience where we've taken measurements in other places, the readings are quite low. So we could do some more digging on that. Chris mentioned that there's some studies out there that help give perspective on that, and I strongly recommend people taking a read on those to understand how that works. But it's important to understand that our cables are heavily shielded, heavily grounded. EMF in and of itself does not present itself as a significant problem to be addressed, and it's due to the design of the cable.
There were post-installation studies done on that issue for Neptune, and we can provide those. I just don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I do know that as Ernie said, it was negligible.
Yeah, I'd love to see those, and just noting that it would be double what Neptune would be. If Neptune was 660, these cables would be double that.
Well, it goes back to the design of the cable again, and the doubling a small number becomes a still small number. But I don't want to get into a running debate on that. It's the serious grounding that goes into terminating the cable where it comes out of the water. I can only explain it is significant. We've got some photos of some transition joints that we have in New York, for instance, that we could include to help give folks an understanding of how that shielding that goes end to end on the cable surrounding the copper conductor, yes, the current is increased, but by the same token, the shielding is substantive and is an important part of why we can say with confidence that those numbers are pretty low.
I just wanted to add that the council does have standards related to EMF or electromagnetic radiation, but those are primarily designed for overhead lines. So we are still exploring what the appropriate standards or design standards might be for this project to protect both public health and safety and the environment. So if there are recommendations of studies or other, I think empirically driven standards that we should consider, we definitely welcome those in public comments. Similarly, there's requirements for grounding to prevent energization that are designed around overhead lines that we will be looking at. I don't know how much of the NESC requirements are applicable to an underwater line, but that's all part of the scoping process that we'll be working through in the next few months.
Those are the right questions. Yes.
Thanks. I'd love it if you would get back to me on the EMF ratings. I know it varies widely, and I'd love to see the estimated range for these particular cables.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other hands raised up here. Nancy, do we have anyone else on the line? Okay. Great. And while we're giving that just 1 second, anybody else in the room have any more comments? Being thorough. Okay. Give it just a second. But
So, well, while we're waiting for that, I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you all for taking time out of your day to show up in person or virtually and ask your questions, learn about the project, learn about the process. We encourage you to continue tracking this and participate as much as you are interested. As I said, there's a lot of opportunities for participation. Please do so. And we'll be around for any questions that you have afterward. And please, there are a lot of cookies back there. Take some cookies with you. You're going to want some later on tonight when you think about it.
yeah, and I'll just second, it looks like we may have lost some folks, but I did see that a number of people look like they came straight from a job site, and we know that makes for a long day. So thanks so much for making the time for this. And Nancy, if you could put my contact information up on the screen just in case anybody wants it, you can send any comments or questions directly to my email address there.